God, thank you for that promise of grace and your faithfulness to us, God. God, I know that when we read your word, God, you're speaking to us and you tell us how you provide us faithfulness and that you are so faithful to us in so many different ways, God. And that you have redeemed us through your grace. You have redeemed us through your Son, God, that we can now come to you, that we can worship you, and that we can now be in this fantastic relationship with you, God. I pray that we give everything to you, that all this glory belongs to you, God. Thank you for your Son and his ministry on this earth. How he set himself forth to be a sacrifice on our behalf. And thank you for resurrecting him. It's that same power that brought him from the grave lives in us. We thank you for that. May we continue in worship as we look into the Word of God. Be with us as we read and allow us to understand what you want us to understand, God. Your intentions with designing your Word, God. Allow us to understand that. Give us wisdom. Give us knowledge throughout this. And I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. You guys can sit.
Okay, so we are about to start our new series on the Song of Solomon. If you're new here, the way we usually do our Sunday services is we go through one book of the Bible. The Bible is actually a collection of books, 66 separate, smaller books. And we usually just start at the beginning of the book, and we do a section of it, and then the next week we do the next section and the next section. So we went through the book of Acts in the past, and now we're going to do the book called the Song of Solomon. So, if you're not familiar with the Song of Solomon, it's an interesting book. Getting feedback from some friends in ministry and from Jennifer and other people in the recent past, I was advised that maybe I should give a disclaimer at the beginning. That I'm going to try to deal honestly and openly with the Song of Solomon. So, be prepared for that. If anything is surprising, shocking, anything like that, I'm going to be as faithful as I can to what the Bible says. So sometimes the Bible is surprising, shocking, and all sorts of things like that. But if there's anything you want to talk about more afterwards to me or Jennifer or Elijah or Shay or any of us, we're here to talk about this sort of stuff. So anyway, so let's go ahead and begin. I'm also, this week's probably going to be a little different than in the past. I'm going to read more from my notes. Normally I just kind of an outline, but I have like points up here. And, I always end up at the end of the day thinking, there's 2 or 3 things I meant to say and I forgot to say, or occasionally I say something wrong, and somebody will come up to me later and be like, did you say this? Yeah, that's what I said. That's not what I meant. But today I'm going to give an overview of the book, The Song of Solomon. And I'm going to try to cover a lot of things, and I want to make sure that I say what I intend to say. And since it's an overview, it's not as structured as normal, so I want to keep myself on track and make sure I stick to the message. So I'm probably going to read more, even though it's a little awkward, but just a little forewarning there. But we'll go ahead and start now. So, first, little introduction. Why are we reading this book? Well, it's probably no surprise to any of you that we live in a sex-saturated culture. Open up, right with that. Whether it's the massive increase in pornography that came with the internet, or the constant barrage of advertising of half-naked people, reality shows like The Bachelor or Bachelorette, those things. The Bachelorette has this thing called a fantasy suite, which you can probably guess what that's all about if you've never seen it. So everywhere we look, society is selling us sex. The sex sells. That's the old marketing adage. Sex sells. And our society is trying to sell sex a lot. And they're trying to sell everything with it. Probably the old joke is, there's some commercial, some half-naked person or whatever, and at the end you're like, what was that actually a commercial for? Like, it was a commercial for shoes? What? The person wasn't even wearing shoes. Sex sells and everything is sold with sex. Now, every culture has idols. So, idol, church word, if you're not Familiar with that? An idol is something that you worship or put in place of God. And every culture has idols, something that holds up as its ultimate value. And I don't think there's any real question that sex is an idol in American culture today. For some, sex represents empowerment. For some, it represents freedom from traditions. For some, it's just the quintessential good time. But for almost everyone in our culture, sex is about the best thing life has to offer. That's kind of what our culture is telling us. And there are churches who've actually advocated the idea that God doesn't even really care much what you do in that area. That's kind of a free-for-all. This is sort of a rehashing of an old idea from the ancient Greeks called Gnosticism. So Gnosticism is an ancient Greek idea that you're basically two completely separate things. You're a spirit and you're a body. The spirit is good, body is bad. They're completely separate. They don't interact in any sort of way. And as long as your spirit is good, you can do whatever you want with your body. That's cool. You just go and do whatever you want. It has no effect on your spirit. Now, with that same idea, I'm going to guess that few of you have actually watched The Bachelorette. I mentioned it earlier. I don't watch it either, actually. But this last season, there was a big controversy that I read about and looked into about two of the main characters. The Bachelorette, the woman, claimed to be a Christian, and one of the male characters claimed to be a Christian as well. And the man believed that people should wait until they're married to have sex. And one day in the fantasy suite with this woman, he talked about his belief that she shouldn't be having sex until marriage, and he shouldn't be having sex until marriage. And I mean, honestly, he did this in kind of an aggressive and annoying way. But one of the other problems was that she had already multiple times slept with someone on the show. So she got pretty mad and offended by this. She got angry and told him that he has no right to be talking to her about any of this. They're not married, they're completely separate people, and she just got really mad. And then she went on and talked about how, sex before marriage is a sin, but lots of things are sins, and Jesus loves us anyway, so it's all cool. Now, as I said, I haven't watched The Bachelorette, but I heard about this controversy, so I went and found the clip on YouTube, and it's a train wreck. I mean, it is just bad. But there's a lot of people from various church backgrounds who kind of have this idea that, Jesus just loves me, doesn't really care what I do about any of these things. And in her mind, it's just lumped in with a bunch of sins that Jesus apparently doesn't care about. Just do what you want to do. He loves you. Everything's cool. Another example I found is a blog, and the title of the blog is, "What if God doesn't care about your vagina?" Okay? Now, the author basically outlined a view of sexuality that's becoming more and more common in churches. And here's part of what she wrote, one paragraph. "I'm here to propose a radical idea to us. God doesn't care all that much about your vagina. Yes, sex affects you. It's a meaningful act, but don't you think God perhaps has bigger things to worry about? Like if you're being kind to those around you, or maybe if you're contributing to your community in a positive way, maybe God cares more about how we treat other people than he does about what we do to enjoy our bodies that we live in. I find it hard to fathom that a woman could be a backstabbing, gossiping, selfish, materialistic person who just happens to not be having sex and still be considered better or holier than a kind-hearted lady who happens to be having sex. Does God really work that way? Heck, does morality work that way?" Now, hopefully, in that brief paragraph, you can already identify some theological and logical problems with that. First, just to get this out of the way, the idea that God has bigger things to worry about is an insult to God because it implies that God has a limited ability to focus. He needs to focus on the big things because he can't get distracted by the quote-unquote small things. And if you know anything about God, he can handle it all. Okay? He knows everything. He can handle everything. So there's no thing that's too small for him to worry about. There's no prioritization in God's view. No, but also, there's a hint of Gnosticism in there. She made the comment that maybe God cares more about how we treat other people than he does about how we enjoy the bodies we live in. So that's sort of that Gnostic idea that the body isn't really you. It's just something you live in. But Christianity has always had a high view of both the body and the soul, and that we are embodied people. God has put us in a body, and our bodies are going to be resurrected. One of the reasons Christianity has historically treated bodies of dead people with reverence and respect and all that sort of stuff is because we believe the body will be resurrected eventually as well. So the Gnostic idea is your body is just this object that you happen to be in, and you is really a spirit. So she kind of has a hint of that. Additionally, there's a whole false equivalency there, that someone is claiming that you can be horrible in every way except not having sex, and that's all cool. But no one's arguing that. I've never heard anyone say, as long as you're not sleeping with anyone, you can be anything you want to be. That's not true. And what she's trying to do is make it seem like people who believe in traditional Christian biblical sexual ethics are awful people because they believe that you can do anything else. But that's not really true. There's a whole bunch of problems there. But why does this sort of argument work so well? Why does it affect culture so well? So many people growing up in church have these sorts of views. Well, first, I think for a long time, the church has been really bad at talking about sexuality and sexual ethics. We just haven't done well at all in teaching what God really thinks about sex. For a long time, churches in America and most of our culture have sort of pretended that it doesn't exist. Okay? I don't know if any of you have ever seen the old TV show I Love Lucy, the 1950s TV show. Lucy O'Donnell, the star of it, became pregnant, and at the time, network censors didn't allow pregnancy to be discussed on TV. So for months, they had to design costumes and the set and everything, hide her behind furniture and everything so that nobody could know she was pregnant. Okay? One of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. How many of you have seen It's a Wonderful Life? So it's a 1940s movie, and in the movie, when, well, I say she's pregnant because it's about his life and he has a family and all sorts of stuff and gotta have kids, the wife says that he's lassoed the stork. And he says, are you? And she says, mm-hmm. But they never actually say it. And then like in the next scene they have kids. Okay? But that's kind of how our culture has dealt with this for a very long time, is just pretend it doesn't exist, talk about a stork or something like that. So then 60s and 70s come, hippie culture, this revolutionary culture comes and wants to break away from tradition, and they're rejecting all these things, and the church was entirely unprepared to handle this sexual revolution that came with all of this. So many churches since then have just been desperately trying to catch up, trying to figure out what can we do as culture goes farther and farther away from biblical ethics. Now, it's hard for the church because the world presents a view of sex that is good, not really good, but they present it as if it's good. And of course, anybody presenting their worldview is going to present it as an entirely amazing thing. There's no downside to what we believe. And they do this. They present this view. They sell this view of sex that sounds really good. But we probably all know that there's something missing in that. And we probably all know people, maybe we are people, who have been hurt by cultural standards around sexuality. We've seen people follow culture on sex and be hurt by it. As I said, many of us, I know we've talked about this with some of you, many of us have been in that. So even with that, our culture is still trying to present even that as a good thing. Ariana Grande has a song, Thank You Next. If you're familiar with the song, it's basically a list of bad, broken relationships. And then she said, but each one I learned something from it, so thank you. Next. That's how culture is presenting this, that even a string of bad, broken relationships is actually a good thing that you should be thankful for, and you should just look forward to the next one. That is not a biblical view, but that's the view our culture is selling to us. And thousands and thousands of young people are listening to this and singing along with this song. They're buying into this view. Now, nobody really wants heartbreak or broken relationships, but this culture is selling that as a good and normal thing that we should actually then be thankful for. And the problem really isn't that our culture is messed up on sex. As Christians, we should expect that every culture shows signs of sinful nature. Because we believe all people are born with sinful nature, so every culture should have that. Now, we also believe every culture has common grace. God has put certain things in all of our hearts. I talked about that in Romans and everything like that. So every culture has good things as well. Not every culture is entirely evil. No culture is entirely evil. But every culture has aspects of sin. And this is one. The real problem is that the church has had a really hard time presenting a better view of sex than the world. That's the real problem. that we're not teaching, we're not seeing, we're not cherishing and loving and promoting a better view of sex and marriage and romance and passion and all these things. And in the absence of any biblical truth, people desperate for answers are going to find them in culture. So, people are often left assuming that God doesn't really offer anything because the church isn't promoting anything, the church isn't teaching anything. So people think God doesn't have anything to say about this. So just go with culture, do whatever you want with the body that you happen to be living in. But here's the truth. God actually cares a lot. And as always, he wants our ultimate good. What he wants for us is good. His design for sex, his intent for sexual relationships is much better than what the world has to offer. The Bible actually talks a lot about love, passion, and sex. There's even a whole book in the Bible called the Song of Solomon about this. And so for the next couple months, we're going to be going through the Song of Solomon. And then for the rest of the semester after that, we're going to be looking at different parts of the Bible and what they tell us, what God has to tell us about his vision, his intent, his design for relationships, marriage, sex, etc. So, as with the whole Bible, the book, the Song of Solomon, is entirely relevant and good. So we're told in the Bible that all Scripture is God-breathed and good for us. It's God's word to us. But the Song of Solomon can also be shocking. I mentioned that to many people because it seems so overtly sexual and passionate. Jewish and Christian leaders for a long time have had some issues with this book, some difficulty. There's a tradition among Jewish rabbis, a teaching that says no man under 30 should read the book, the Song of Solomon. Okay, there was a 3rd century Christian writer named Origen, and Origen had this to say about the Song of Solomon. I advise everyone who is not yet rid of the temptations of the flesh and blood, and has not yet ceased to feel the passions of this bodily nature, to refrain from reading this book and the things that will be said about it. So basically, Origen's advice is if you're alive, don't read the book. Okay? You know, if you have any feelings in you about anything, don't read this book. But as a result, some Christian writers have turned this book into an allegory. So if you're not an English literature fan, you might not really know what an allegory is, but an allegory is a story in which there's a hidden story. Every character and every major object and thing in the story is really just a symbol for something else. Okay, so a prime example of this is there's an old allegorical interpretation of the Good Samaritan, and it gets really crazy. Okay, so like, for example, the Good Samaritan takes the injured person to a hotel, the inn, and he gives him 2 coins and says that these coins are to take care of him until I come back, and then I'll take care of him. Okay, so in the allegorical interpretation, the Samaritan is Jesus, the injured person is a sinner, Jesus takes the sinner to the church, the inn, leaves 2 coins, which are the Old and New Testament, and says, take care of him to the church until I, Jesus, come back. Yeah, it's a really cool interpretation. It's complete nonsense. Okay? One of the guidelines for interpretation is it can't mean for you something it could not possibly have meant for them. Okay, so when Jesus is telling this story to the original audience, he could not have meant, here's the Old and New Testament. Because the New Testament didn't exist yet. Okay, it could not have meant that. So in allegory, it can sound really amazing, really cool, really spiritual, but one of the problems is that we can just make up anything. I could say those 2 coins mean anything, as long as I can convince you, who knows, So allegory can get kind of messed up. Now, there are some allegories in the Bible. The Bible actually explains the allegories. So, like there's an allegory in the Old Testament where God is a vineyard owner. And it tells us that the vineyard owner is God. It tells us straight there in the Bible. So there are some. So allegory comes along and people start to interpret various things. So Song of Solomon became an allegory for a lot of people because it let us get away from the obvious meaning of the text. You could say, well, we don't want to deal with this passionate, sexual, explicit text, so let's make it about something different. Let's make it about God loving his people. Okay? But here's the thing. God created both sex and marriage. It's in the opening of the Bible. The very beginning of the Bible, God creates man and woman. He brings them together. He said that the two shall become one. He told them that he blessed them to be fruitful, multiply. So there's nothing in the book, the Song of Solomon, that is going to make God blush, or that he's embarrassed by, or that he's worried we might read. Okay? God didn't give us the Song of Solomon and say, I hope they don't read it until they're done with all temptations. Like, that's not what happened. He gave it to us to read and to learn from, just like he gave us the entire Bible. So despite the history of being overly cautious in interpreting or even misinterpreting the Song of Solomon, there's never been a question that it is part of the Bible. So it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're not familiar, Dead Sea Scrolls are ancient Hebrew writings that were found in a series of caves in the Dead Sea, and they date from about 200 years before Jesus to 70 AD, a little bit after Jesus. And luckily, they were put into nice jars, large ceramic jars, and put in a cave in a desert. And if you know anything about decomposition, things need water and light to decompose, and they were in a cave in a desert, so they didn't decompose. So we have these ancient documents going back to even before the time of Jesus, and we have the Song of Solomon in their copy of the Bible. So we know what's in there. It's in the Septuagint, which is an early church age, so after Jesus, but it's a Jewish document where the Jewish scholars translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, because lots of Jews didn't live in Israel anymore, and they spoke Greek, so it's in there. And it's always been in every Christian Bible. So there's no question about whether the Song of Solomon should be in the Bible. It's always been in the Bible for both Christians and for Jews. Okay, the Song of Solomon is in a section of the Bible that we call wisdom literature. This includes Job, Proverbs, Psalms, and Ecclesiastes. And these are books that provide biblical wisdom for how we should live, guidance for living. So, for example, in Job, we learn that we can trust God because he's in control and he cares, even when things look bad. In Proverbs, we learn that wisdom comes from knowing God, and there are principles for making good, God-honoring decisions. In Psalms, we learn about how we can truly worship God with our entire selves, our mind, body, and emotions. In Ecclesiastes, we learn that life is only truly fulfilling when we're focused on God. We can waste all sorts of time and energy pursuing all sorts of other things, but ultimately, truly being fulfilled, being self-actualized, to use that psychology term, comes from living your life for God. And here in Song of Solomon, we learn about how God has created passion, romance, marriage, including sex. And these aren't bad things, they're good things. These aren't things that we should pretend don't exist, as some traditionally have, and they aren't things that can be turned into idols, as many modern people have done. And these are things to be understood as gifts from God, and they even help us to know God. So that brings us to another thing. Well, the Song of Solomon is truly about a man and a woman. It's not an allegory to some hidden sexual message and that kind of thing. It's really about a man and a woman. It's also indirectly about God. How do I know that? Not because it's some hidden interpretation that I magically obtained or anything like that. It's because the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 5 tells us that all marriage is really a way that we can see how God loves us. Okay? All marriage. Love and marriage are real things, and they're real gifts from God. But they're always more than that. They are one way that God shows us what it means to have a relationship with Him, to love Him and to be loved by Him. So even though there's no question Song of Solomon should be in the Bible, there are questions that we have about the book. For example, we don't actually know who wrote the Song of Solomon. So the majority view is that it was written by Solomon. That comes from verse 1 that tells us it's the Song of Solomon. But we don't actually know that. We do know that Solomon wrote a bunch of psalms. It tells us in 1 Kings 4 that he wrote more than 1,000 psalms. So maybe he did write this one. But there are some views that the reason it says Song of Solomon at the beginning isn't because he wrote it, but because it was about his marriage, or that it's just about marriage and it's dedicated to him as sort of a symbol for all couples. But ultimately, none of that really matters, because nothing about how we read the book changes based on who wrote it. Now, it does alleviate one potential problem. Some people have questioned whether Solomon wrote it because the book about a deeply committed monogamous relationship doesn't, yeah, you guys already see where this is going. Okay? Some people are like, that doesn't sound like Solomon. Because Solomon had a bunch of wives, okay? And everything. So, some of the ideas are, well, maybe he wrote it early on. Maybe he wrote it at the end, kind of like Ecclesiastes, where Ecclesiastes, he says, I tried all these other things and nothing fulfilled me, so God is the answer. Maybe Song of Solomon is like that. But again, nothing about how we read the book actually changes. We don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews either, but it doesn't matter. God wrote all of the Bible ultimately. He's the real author. So it comes from God, and that's what matters. So what God is saying to us is through this book is what we really need to focus on. What is it that God is saying to us? What is it that we can learn from this bit of wisdom literature? So now, an introduction, we're going to get into an overview of the book. Today, this week, we're going to do an overview of the book, and then we'll get into more specifics later. But the things we need to learn. Number one, first, physical and emotional love and passion go together. Okay, so verse 1 of the book, I said, I hinted at earlier, here's what it says. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. So verse 1 is basically a title. Okay? Most of the books of the Bible don't really begin with a title like that, but this one does, as a title. But then the very next verse, verse 2, says, Oh, that he would kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your caresses are more delightful than wine. Now, for a biblical book, that's quite a beginning. So it tells us right off the bat that this is a book about physical and emotional passion. There's no doubt about that, right from the very beginning. It's about passion. And just a few verses later, in verse 7, that same woman says, Tell me, you whom I love, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you let them rest at noon? Why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of her companions? So we know she's not just hot for this guy. She is in love with this guy. She says, you whom I love. So there's not merely just a physical passion, but there's an emotional, deep love. And he loves her too. Because then in verse 9, when he is speaking, so this song goes back and forth between the man and the woman and a few others. He says in verse 9, I compare you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. So he's calling her his darling. Now, a quick side note, sometimes people today like to joke about some of the compliments in the Song of Solomon. Like, should I call the woman I love a horse? There's a verse later where he says her nose is like a tower. Some of these things can be kind of confusing. We'll get into that more later. Right now, I'm just giving you an overview. We'll get into some of those things and what they mean. But next week, we're going to look more closely, well, 2 weeks, we'll look more closely at chapter 1 and get into some of these comparisons. But right now, what we need to see is that this man and this woman love each other, and they passionately love each other. They want to be physical with each other. Physical and emotional love go together. So that's clear right from the very beginning of the book. This book doesn't hide that in any sort of way. Like I said, there's a title, and then it jumps right into it. Okay? And remember, we saw that when God saw that man was alone, he said, that's not good. He made a woman. And he brought them together. So again, he made love and marriage and passion and reproduction, all that sort of things to go together. So physical and emotional love go together. So number 2, physical and emotional passion are designed to be focused on and bound by marriage. So if you just sort of read through the Song of Solomon in one sitting, you'll discover it's confusing. It has a confusing layout. It's hard to figure out, is this story chronological? Is it just starting from the beginning and moving through? Or is it some other way? There have been views that maybe the Song of Solomon isn't even one story at all, just a collection of different stories about different people and stuff like that. Because it is confusing. You gotta figure out what order things happening. It really is one story though. It's one story, and in fact, it's in a pattern called a chiasm. Now, for those of you who were here this summer B, you might have learned about chiasm, or if you're John, who has a really strange fascination with chiasms? Now, chiasms are means.
The book of Leviticus is a chiasm.
Yeah, the whole Bible is a chiasm. Okay, chiasms are a common form of Hebrew writing. We don't really use them today in English. It's not our style writing, but it is in Hebrew writing, and it comes frequently in the Bible. And it is kind of fascinating. So I teach John about that, but it is fascinating. But the Song of Solomon is actually a chiasm. So first, let me explain what this means. We're used to a logical progression from beginning to end, whether you're talking about a story from beginning to end, or if you're talking about a logical argument. Here's where I begin, here's where I end. So we're used to A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and D being the conclusion. Whether it's the conclusion of the story or the conclusion of my argument. But chiasms work a little bit differently. A chiasm goes A, B, C, D, C, B, A. So it's a system called parallelism. So the first half and the second half parallel each other. And we build up to an argument and then down from the argument, backwards. So in chiasm, D is actually the main point. So the main point's in the middle. So again, that's not how we're used to, but it's actually very common in the Bible. So in the middle of the Song of Solomon, what is that? Well, it turns out that the middle two verses of the Song of Solomon, numerically, if you count out the verses, or in the middle structurally, are the very end of chapter 4 and the very beginning of chapter 5, 4:16 and 5:1. And here's what 4:16 says. The woman is speaking, and she says, "Awaken, north wind, come, south wind, blow on my garden, and spread the fragrance of its spices. Let my love come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits." And then in 5:1, the man responds, "I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gather my myrrh with my spices. I eat my honeycomb with my honey. I drink my wine with my milk." Now, you probably don't need to be an expert on love poems to get an idea what they're talking about there. It's not a vegetable garden that he's going to. Right? They're not talking about that. They're talking about their wedding night. And we know that this is the wedding night because chapter 4 actually outlines a royal wedding in ancient Hebrew culture. So chapter 4 leads through the wedding and then ends with their wedding night. So this is the center of the book, the Song of Solomon, the coming together of this new husband and wife, the two becoming one. So physical and emotional passion and love are to be focused on and bound in marriage. And it's right there in the book. Like everything is focused on that marriage and that wedding. So a couple years ago, we had a semester where we went through the book of Genesis. In 1 week, we talked about the Bible's comprehensive teaching on sex being only within marriage. I'm just going to briefly say that now. We can talk more if you want to know about it more, because I know that for a lot of people, you might not understand that argument, or you might not have seen that argument, or been taught that argument, or you might question that argument. Maybe you've heard people say that a lot, but you're like, where does it actually say that in the Bible? Because the truth is that there is no single Bible verse where you can point to and say, right there, that verse, it says, don't sleep together until you're married. That's not in the Bible at all. But when you look at the Bible as a whole, it's very clear over and over again that the consistent teaching is that marriage and sex go together, and sex is reserved for marriage. So again, if you want to know more about that, if you're not sure about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But right here in the Song of Solomon, we just see that focus on the marriage. This passionate romance is focused on and then bound by marriage. Okay, and this book has a repeated warning that goes along with that. The woman says multiple times throughout the book, starting in 2:7, she speaks to other women, and she says, "Young women of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and the wild does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time." So she's warning people that the passion and romance and love, those are normal, healthy things. But there's a time and a place for those things. And be careful not to stir up or awaken that before the appropriate time. This woman's telling us sex is great There's a time for it, though. It's after the wedding. So I want you to understand God's word consistently throughout the Bible, including the Song of Solomon, this deeply passionate, deeply physical book, is telling us that physical and emotional passion are designed to be within marriage and bound by marriage and focused on marriage. Now, before we move on to point number 3, I want to address one more important thing. It's absolutely true that God has designed sex to be within marriage, and sex outside of marriage is a sin. That's true. Biblically, it's very clear. But it's also absolutely true that we are all sinners, and we're all in need of forgiveness and redemption through Jesus. Sex before marriage is sin, but it's not the unforgivable sin. The Bible presents sexual sin as particularly damaging. Paul says it's a sin that we do to our own bodies, but Jesus came and died to redeem us from our sin. So when Christians stand before Jesus at the end of time, we are all going to be wearing pure white robes. The Bible tells us that we, all Christians, are the bride of Christ. At our wedding, we're going to be wearing white. We can have complete forgiveness and new life in Jesus. If you don't understand how this works, again, we would love to talk to you about it. I would love to talk to you about it. John and Elijah, the guys who were leading in worship earlier, would love to talk to you about it. Shay, who was doing the prayer and the song reading earlier, would love to talk to you about Jesus. If you're not sure that you have been forgiven, you're not sure what it means to be forgiven or how to be forgiven by Jesus, we would love to talk to you about that. So we want you to know right now, though, whatever things you've messed up in the past, things that the Bible calls sin, whether they're sexual sins or any other sins, gossiping, stealing, whatever, those can all be completely washed away by Jesus. And we want that for you. So now, number 3, though. Physical and emotional passion come from God. Okay, we've seen how the book of Song of Solomon is about passion and love and marriage. But another thing that's important here is that the entire Bible is about God. So sometimes people wonder how this is related. Well, it tells us in there that this book about passion and love and marriage and romance, all of this comes from God. Now, it shouldn't be surprising to us. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. So every good thing comes from God. But specifically here in the Song of Solomon, we see that passion and love and romance and marriage all come from God. So at the end of the book, chapter 8, verse 6, here's how it's written in the English Standard Version. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave, its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Okay? Now, I point out that's the English Standard Version because I usually use the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, and it has it written instead of the very flame of the Lord, it says love's flames or fiery flames, an almighty flame. But even then, in the HCSB Study Bible, the notes say that the fiery flames are the blaze of the Lord. So there's some variation in how this is translated. But there's no real variation in what it means. It's a difficult word to translate because it's where it says the flames of the Lord is actually a Hebrew word that is the word for flames with Yah at the end. And you may not know, Yah is an abbreviation for God's name in the Old Testament. So Elijah, Isaiah, those are names that end with God. Isaiah means God saves. Things like that. Okay, so we know that this is something about God and flames, although God is often called the Almighty, so like the HCSB or CSB say Almighty. But regardless of how your translation says it, what it's telling us is that the flame of passion comes from God. Temper Longman, a really well-known, respected scholar, has a good commentary on Song of Solomon, and here's what he says about this. In the entire book of Song of Solomon, this is the only direct reference to God by name, by any name. Here, the poet chooses to mention the name of God, a name otherwise hidden and reflective of his operation behind the scenes. God is not the conscious concern of the couple as they celebrate their sexual love, just as he is not himself ever portrayed in a sexual sense. Nevertheless, God is love, 1 John 4:16. And those who would know and worship him must know that love. The greatest physical pointer to such love is the committed sexual intimacy between husband and wife. So one thing we need to keep in mind as we go through the Song of Solomon is that physical and emotional passion that we're reading about are good gifts from God. And as I said at the beginning, marriage and everything that goes along with it is designed by God. So it's a gift God has given to all people. One important distinction in Protestant Christianity from Catholic Christianity is that Protestants understand marriage to be something we call a common grace. A common grace, just a fancy term for something good that God has given to all people. Rain. Rain makes plants grow. And it doesn't only rain in Israel, God has given rain and sun and fun and family and all sorts of good things to all people so that people can see him and know him. Talks about that in Romans 1. From God's good creation, all people can know something about him. So common grace is a good thing given to all people. In the Catholic Church, though, marriage is considered a sacrament. And a sacrament is a holy ritual that only an ordained Catholic priest in the Catholic faith can do. And those include things like baptism and marriage. And Catholics believe that through the sacraments, you actually receive God's grace by doing the certain rituals. Now, this is important because for Protestants, if somebody is, if a Hindu couple gets a Hindu wedding and then converts, becomes Christians, we celebrate that, but we don't make them get remarried because we recognize that Hindu marriage, even though it was probably involving false idols and all sorts of things, marriage is real. Even if an atheist gets married, or a Hindu gets married, or anybody gets married, it's a real marriage. So we recognize that because it's a good gift that God has given to all people. And we see that here because love and passion are these good gifts of God that he gives us. Okay? So, number 4. Physical and emotional passion are meant to point us to God. As I mentioned a little bit ago, Romans 1 says that all these good things that God has given us in creation are meant to point us to God. In his letter to the Ephesians, the Apostle Paul spends some time outlining the right relationship between a husband and wife. So he goes through these verses and he's outlining how a husband and wife should relate to each other. But then there's a strange turn at the end in 5:31-32. It says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. It's a strange turn. So he's outlining this relationship of a husband and wife, but he tells us at the end that all marriage is really meant to point to Christ and the church, God and his people. So marriage is a real gift, it's a real thing, but it's also something that points us to God. So throughout the Bible, marriage is portrayed as a commitment, a covenant between a man and a woman, where a man chooses his bride and gives himself for her good. Now certainly, in the Bible, we see lots of messed up marriages. Okay, we see that. The Bible's very honest about reality. The Bible does not hide the truth of human nature. But even though there's divorce and adultery and all sorts of bad stuff in the Bible, we consistently see the teaching of the Bible is that marriage is this covenant where a man joins himself to a woman in a lifelong relationship. We can see this in the book of Hosea, for example. We see in that story God saying that he has committed himself to his bride, his people. And we see it in Paul's writing, where earlier in chapter 5, he says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. So this is what marriage is supposed to be, that commitment. Okay? The ultimate act of love in history is Jesus giving himself for us, dying on the cross for us, saving us, making us holy, and giving us those pure white robes that it talks about in Revelation that we're going to wear for eternity. That is what love ultimately is. And also, God has given us marriage as an earthly picture of that love. In a good marriage, we're supposed to see an inkling of how God loves us. When a wife loves her husband and cherishes him and follows him, we're seeing a small picture of how the church, God's people, are supposed to relate to God. And when a husband works hard to love his wife, and protect his wife, and to guide his wife, those things are how God leads his church and protects his church and guides his church and presents his church as holy. And the husband wants nothing more than to see his family grow and thrive. We're seeing that picture, how the Spirit works in our lives. So here's an important point. I know there are some of you here today who have no desire to get married. Okay? It's not anything you're thinking about. So if that's you might be wondering, what is this going to have to do with me? We're going to spend the next few months talking about this, and I don't have any interest in this. So if that's you, I want to say a couple of things. First, when Jennifer was 18, she said she had no desire to be married. At 20, she was married. Okay, so sometimes things change. But even if they don't change, here's the actual truth. Every Christian is going to get married one day. And it might not be at all in this life, but according to the Bible, all Christians, the church, will one day be married to Christ in heaven. There will be a wedding ceremony. We will wear those white robes and be Christ's pure, holy, spotless bride. So when we talk about marriage, even if you are not interested in being married on earth, that's perfectly fine. That's a legitimate option. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to get married. In fact, the Bible says for some people, there are good reasons to not get married. And there are advantages to that. Okay? If that's you, know that marriage still relates to you because you will one day be married to Christ in heaven. Okay? So remember, the whole story of the Bible is a story of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. And like a summary of how the Bible goes from beginning to end. God created us to be in a relationship with Him, but we chose to sin and rebel against Him. We chose to do things our own way, and we wanted to ignore God. And we separate ourselves from Him through that sin, that rebellion against God. But as a loving groom, He came after us. He pursued us. He had chosen us, and He did not give up on us. Jesus came, He died for us, He washed away all of our sins and our rebellion. He redeemed us for Himself as His bride. And one day we'll be forever restored into that relationship that was meant to be. In heaven, there will be a restoration of that relationship where we have that close intimacy, that love. He loves us and we will love Him. So in heaven, He will be our groom and we will be His bride. So it's a quick overview of the entire Song of Solomon. As I said, in future weeks, we're going to go in and look more deeply at particular passages. But I wanted to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks. But now we're going to move into the time of communion. So I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 11, 23 to 26 here, as we do most weeks. So Paul, talking about Jesus, says, "On the night when He was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread, and when He had given thanks, He broke it and said, 'This is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, also, He took the cup after supper and said, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes.'" So what is communion? Communion is a few things. It's a remembrance. Twice there it says, "Do this in remembrance of me." It's a proclamation of what we as a church believe about Jesus. It says, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes." So when we do this, we are remembering what Jesus did for us as believers. But we're also proclaiming to everyone else. Proclaiming to the other believers in this room, proclaiming to any non-believers in this room. If you are not a Christian, if you don't believe what the Bible says about Jesus, that's okay. We're glad you're here. But we are here proclaiming God's truth to you through this act. It's an expression of a relationship. This is my body which is for you. This cup is the new covenant of my blood. So we talk each week about how communion is one of two ordinances or commands of the church. The first being baptism. You're baptized into the church. It's a one-time ceremony. It shows your relationship, your death, burial, and resurrection with Jesus symbolically. But the Lord's Supper is an ongoing thing where we continue to express that relationship. So if you're not a Christian here, you aren't a member of a church, aren't baptized, we'd ask that you not participate. But you're welcome to observe and think about what we're doing as we proclaim what we believe about Jesus. Also, it's a time of repentance and renewal. This is a time to think about what Jesus has done for you. And if you have any unconfessed sin, it's a time to pray and to confess that sin to God and thank Him for His forgiveness. But while it is serious and holy, it is also a joyous time. Sometimes we can approach communion as this somber time, and there is some of that in there. And Jesus died for us. But there's also a joy in that we have been forgiven. We have been washed, pure, white as snow. And that's a joyous, wonderful thing. So we should be thankful and joyful, happy as we go through this. So I'm going to ask for Reese and John to help me out here. As you receive this, and take a moment and pray. Open up the part. These are new to those who were here last week. So you take the bread, so Christ's body given for you. Take the juice, symbolic of wine. So there's blood given for you, shed for you. Okay. As always, just leave that there and we'll pick that up later. Now, Elijah and John are going to lead us again in worship.